Hello, my name is Ashley, this is Faith of Ratters, and welcome back. So in today's video we're going to be talking about how to set up a cage for your rats. It's not going to be a video of me setting up one of my cages because I find that incredibly stressful. I just did this cage yesterday and I found it so stressful just by itself without even the idea of filming it. So it's not something that I generally like to do because I find it incredibly stressful. It makes the whole experience even worse. However, there are some videos on my channel where I have done this, and there are lots of videos on my channel of like cage tours and things like that, and sort of cage cleaning type videos and vlogs. So if you want that type of content, it is here on my channel. It's just not this video. We're going to be talking about how to set up a rat cage and the whys behind it as well. So that's what we're going to do. Before we get into the topics of the video, I will just say I apologise for this shadow on my face of my tripod on my phone filming me. It is really sunny today, which is lovely. I absolutely love it. I've missed the sunshine this winter. It's been very, very grey here in the UK. However, it does create this shadow, which has slightly gone away, so I think it might actually go away. Anyway, let's get into it. So the first thing that we should talk about is cage size. Now, I don't really like to fixate on minimums, but there are minimums, and I think below this is inadequate housing for rats, and I probably would go so far as to say it's neglect. So the minimum housing for a small group of rats, sort of like a pair or a trio or maybe even four, is 80 by 50 by 80 centimeters. I think this is small, don't get me wrong. This is not a cage I would have a large group of rats in, but it is okay for a small group of rats. Most of the cages I'm going to mention to you that I recommend are bigger than this. The footprint of my cage is 90 by 60, and obviously I think it's like 130 tall. Footprint is really important, and if you can, the bigger the footprint can be better. However, do bear in mind that sometimes larger territories can make group dynamics a little bit more unstable, so that is something to keep in mind if you have an unstable group. But I will say, if you can put two cages together and have them long ways rather than up, that is okay. We've got enough height in these cages to be able to allow them the room to climb, but the floor space is important too. Now, some of the cages I will recommend. So we have some of the big metal double cages. Some cages, like the Little Zoo Ventura and the Critter Nation, you can buy singly. So just like the bottom half or just the top half. I would recommend getting the bottom half if you don't have the top half already. But you can buy these singly. They also do come double, like the way I have them. So as I mentioned, there's the Little Zoo Ventura, which is a cage that I have. They're really a popular one, and the one that is a bit more widespread across the world is the Critter Nation. There is a version of this cage called the Ferret Nation, and it's the same dimensions. It does, however, have much larger bar spacing, and so isn't generally going to be appropriate for younger rats or does or smaller rats. So it's something to think about, making sure you don't get the Ferret Nation by accident. There are some of the smaller cages. Now I will say these are not small by any means. They're not inadequate, they're quite large. I would say they're comparable to half of my cage that I have here. Those cages in the UK, there are two of them. There is the Mamble 100 and the Coco Large. These two cages are really good cages for a smaller group of rats, up to about 4 or 5. I would probably say I wouldn't push them past that much. They aren't as small as they look in stock pictures. I've seen some people say they're really small because I think they look like the smaller hamster cages that you can get your hands on, but they are much bigger. They are comparable to this. I've even seen photos of fully grown adults inside the cage, lid on, everything, and they do fit in there sat down. So it isn't that small, but I would say it's not something for a larger group, for a group more than about 5. Even 5, I would say, is kind of pushing it in one of those cages. Another thing that I should mention on cages is I personally don't think there are many good examples of DIY cages for rats, which is a shame because I know for other animals like hamsters and guinea pigs there are lots of DIY options that can bring the prices down. This isn't really the case for rats unless you have welding equipment or something like that. I wouldn't recommend a wood-based cage for rats. 1, they will chew it and they will get through it, and 2, they will pee on it and it will get stinky. And another thing, if you're doing DIY cages, is rats require full ventilation, so we are not doing sort of like tank setups and things like that. I think there's arguments to be had about tanks with tank topper style cages on top. I think those could be made in a suitable way, but I do not agree with rats being housed in any sort of tank. There are some people who do that, but I do not agree with it. Okay, so now on to substrate. The first and foremost thing is it needs to be deep and loose and diggable. This immediately rules out fleece. Fleece is not appropriate for rats in any sort of situation. I don't care if you have a dig box in your cage, or they get a lot of out time and they have things to dig in, or they have lots of nesting material. Rats require loose substrate. They are a fossorial species, just like hamsters, which means they are burrowers. And if you don't give them the opportunity to burrow, they obviously can't do that, and that is a natural behaviour that they should be able to express if they so choose. So substrate is a really, really important thing, and fleece is just not an acceptable alternative for rats. I would also argue that I don't really think it's a good alternative for most animals. I know a lot of people use it for guinea pigs, and I have questions about that, because fleece actually, when you wash it in the washing machine, creates a lot of microplastics, which isn't something that I hear a lot of people talk about and is an environmental concern. So that's another thing to consider. It's also just not really feasible for rats with just how much waste they produce. It doesn't absorb the waste well enough to protect their respiratory systems from the ammonia that's in their urine, so it's just not an option. It's just not an option, so don't do it. Okay, so that is the next thing. I recommend at least 30 centimeters deep worth of substrate. So the general thing that people recommend you do is to create a perspex tray using the measurements from your own cage and building it yourself, or you could have somebody else build it. I personally will recommend this to everybody, even if you're not planning to keep rats for years and years and years and years and years, and that is because perspex is very durable. I have not heard a single story of perspex breaking. You may have to reseal it or retape it or anything like that, but the actual perspex sheets are very durable and very long lasting. I haven't heard of anybody having an issue with them. The second thing is they also resell quite well along with your cage, so it's not something that I generally would be worried about. It is an investment, but I think it is very much worth it. If you are saving up to make that investment, there are some cheaper alternatives. So I've seen people use cardboard or Corex / chloroplast. I've seen people use those playpen grids as well, zip tied together. That can be a really great option. Another way to cheapen it for you is to not buy a perspex sheet for the base and just use the base that comes with your cage. That is also an option, so don't rule that out, and that will make the perspex a little bit cheaper if it's just a tray for around the sides. As for what substrate to use, you have a lot of choice. You can go for a dust extracted, kiln dried hardwood or softwood shaving. I would avoid cedar, but pine is perfectly safe, despite what people say. If it is kiln dried, it is safe for your rats. We also have things like hemp. It is not something that I would personally choose to use because it can be a little bit dusty, and it also doesn't hold burrows very well by itself, so it's not something I'd use on its own. You also have things like dust extracted cardboard shavings, which is something that I've used in the past and absolutely do love. My favourite one has gone out of business though, so. Or you can do what I do, and that is bioactive. I don't ever have to change it out. It has little buggies in there doing the cleaning for me, which is great. I love it. I have lots of videos on my channel if you want to hear more about bioactive, but you have lots of options for substrate, and it is incredibly important that your rats have access to substrate to be able to express their natural behaviours. Next, which is kind of linked to substrate, and that is litter. Rats are very smart and they are very easy to litter train. If they have a different substrate to their main substrate, they'll know that's the place I do my poops. And if you take their poops and put them in there, eventually they get the hang of it. Generally, most people will use a paper pellet as litter, so don't use anything that is clumping, anything that is clay-based, anything that has scent or unnatural additives in it like baking powder and things like that. Avoid those types of substrates, but you do have things like Breeder Select, Back to Nature, Tesco does their own brand of paper pellets. and I think it's called Yesterday's News. This is one that is available in the US. So there are lots of different brands of paper pellets that you can use. I would avoid using things like pine pellets because these do break down into dust, which is not good for the respiratory system. And I also have heard they're not that absorbent. Anyway, so those are litter. Do give your rats some place they can go that is a litter tray. This will make cleaning their cage much easier for you, and it will be less stressful for them because you're not taking their scent away from the whole entire cage, you're just removing the soiled parts. Now let's talk about actually building the cage and things in your cage. I have split them up into 3 different categories. Big, like, skeleton pieces, fall breakers, and smaller items. So big skeleton pieces are things like wheels, large branches that you don't generally need to move around very much, or trays like this that are sitting on the shelf that is inside the cage. These big sort of things you don't generally want to move around very much. They are much better to just leave them there and don't worry about moving them. The nice thing with the Tic Tac wheels that I use is that you can take the wheel off and clean it, but you don't have to move the brackets. So those are the big skeleton pieces, and these are what I would shape your cage around, those different areas. Then you have fall breakers, which is really important to ensure that your rats don't injure themselves. So you have lots of options when it comes to fall breakers. You have tie holders, cargo nets, different types of nets, hammocks with like holes in them, that sort of thing, hammocks that go across the cage. You have lots of options for fall breakers, so make sure you do include some of them in your cage just for safety. And then other smaller items in your cage, you have things like foraging toys, chew toys, smaller perches, ropes, and things like that. These things will then go in between your fall breakers and your big skeleton pieces to create an active layout so your rats can climb and jump and balance. It's very important they're able to do that to keep up their agility and their fitness. We don't want to make our cages too easy for our rats to get around, otherwise they aren't going to be using those muscles and keeping those muscles, which is really important, especially for older rats, to slow down hind leg degeneration and things like that. Then one of the last things is places to sleep and nesting material, obviously. So nesting material can be a wide range of things. Nesting material can be shredded up paper, newspaper shreds, hay, straw, fleece scraps. You have lots of options, and you also want to give your rats a choice for different types of places to sleep. So you have hammocks, different types of hanging beds, baskets, perch hammocks, enclosed hides, and under the substrate hides is another good option. Rats generally like to sleep either in a higher part of the cage or underground. I think most rats will favour the cage top, so things like hammocks and such. These are their preferred places to sleep. But do give them choice and do make sure there is room for more than one rat in there so they can cuddle up and be with their friends. Water sources is also obviously really important, so I would recommend to use both bottles and bowls to give them the choice. And I also think that the pros and cons sort of outweigh each other. Cons of the bowls are that you do find they get much dirtier. Bottles obviously stays a lot more hygienic, but bottles can jam or they can run out, whereas bowls generally don't do that. So I do think it's good for access to both. They also do like to clean themselves and splash around in water bowls, which is a good enrichment for them as well. And the last thing that I wanted to talk about in this video is a general sort of like principle rather than something to specifically put in your rat's cage, and that is choice. Giving your rats choice is really great for their mental health. It does reduce stress and it does make them more resilient to stress, which is a really good thing for them, obviously, because stress does have an impact on the immune system and therefore the health of your rats. So choice is a really good and important thing to make sure you include. So this is choice for different types of accessories, different ways of feeding, different sleeping spots. Everything that I mentioned can involve an element of choice, and it is really important for our rats. Alison Campbell, who is the leader, I guess, the commandeer of the Ratwise group that I do talk about so much, she is also the person who came up with the Shunammite diet, and you may have heard me recommend her book, The Scuttling Gourmet, which is based on rat diet. She has made some excellent videos on rat behaviour and stress resilience recently for her Nurture and Nature event. I have been helping out with the social media for that, which has been really fun. The event is now over, but the YouTube videos are still on her channel, and she has a lot of videos about stress resilience and choice and things like that, and it is something that I would recommend. I do also have this infographic that I made. I'm just going to put it on this side of the screen. This infographic that I made about choice and different ways that you can give your rats choice in their cage layout, which is something really important to consider. Now, when it comes to doing a great layout, it will take time, and nobody, I don't say nobody because I've seen some pretty great newbie cage layouts. However, most people will improve with time, and once you have a good wide range of cage accessories, it is easier to create cage layouts. So don't be put off by your first 1 or 2 or even 3 cage layouts not being quite what you want. You will get sometimes, even as a pretty experienced owner, that your cage layout you just don't like. This is one of them. It is perfectly enriching for the rats. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. I just don't like it. I don't know what it is. Just a personal problem, I guess. So yes, that is what to put in your rat's cage and how to lay it out and things like that. In the future, I will try to make a video, sort of a practical video of how exactly to put the cage together, but those are the things that you should be including. Now, I will say they don't have to be naturalistic like my cage is. It's just something that I prefer. You can have bright colours, and I know a lot of people with excellent cage layouts that are very colourful. It's just not my cup of tea. I guess I'm a beige rat mum. What can I say? What can I say? I did get a comment once about that on, I think it was TikTok? It was on a short video that I did, so it might have been on Instagram or TikTok. It might even have been here, but I just thought it was so funny, so comparing me to a beige mom. I think it's great. I am, and there is nothing I can say. I just am. So yes, I hope this video was really helpful. If it was, if you found it helpful or you do like the vibe of my channel, please do stick around and subscribe. If you really like the vibe of my channel, you can become a channel member. There are lots of different perks. You can go and look at them. There are 4 different levels. Some of the higher perks do include personal messages, free t-shirts, things like that. So go check it out if you haven't already, and I will see you in my next video. Alright then, bye!